We've already said that the facelifted Xpeng G6 is perhaps the best electric SUV within this segment. Now, what happens when you add another motor to the front axle and make this car go from 0 to 100 in about 4 seconds? Now, the G6 Performance that we have here is largely identical to the G6 Long Range Pro that we reviewed in the past, the only difference being the fact that there is an electric motor in the front. However, this car still remains powered by the same 80.8 kilowatt-hour LFP battery, which means that this car has an effective range that's a little bit shorter than the rear-wheel drive model, coming in at 510 kilometers on the WLTP cycle. In terms of charging, this car will accept up to 11 kilowatt AC, allowing this car to charge from dead to full in a little bit under 8 hours, whereas in terms of DC charging, that's where this car completely blows the competition out of the water, because it can accept up to 451 kilowatts of DC charging speed, which means that this car can go from 10 to 80% in about 12 minutes. On top of that, because this runs on the new SEPA or SEPA 2.0 platform, which runs an 800-volt architecture, that's why this car can charge as fast as it does, it is also incredibly efficient, with that 510 WLTP range very easily exceeded when driven about in town. Now, more importantly, given that this does have a performance moniker, this car goes from 0 to 100 in a little bit under 4.2 seconds, making this car incredibly fast, although why would you need it to be? Now, of course, the G6 Performance that we have here is part of the facelift G6 lineup, which is why the standard car went from front-wheel drive to rear-wheel drive, and that's why now we have an all-wheel drive variant of the G6 in Malaysia. However, in terms of visual differences, just like the G6 Long Range, there are very few changes. Firstly, the Xpeng badge has been moved from here to up here on the bonnet, allowing for a full-width LED light bar up here, which they refer to as the Star Blade or Star Wing or something to that effect. Now, the indicators are actually integrated into this bar, which means that they do change color depending on what you're doing with it, and your main beams live further down here. In terms of the overall design, however, aside from those changes, this car remains exactly the same, which means that you still get a mesh pin sort of thing going on down there, a very clean front end, all of this made to make this car a little bit more aerodynamic. Now, one thing about the Xpeng G6 is that this car is absolutely loaded to the brim with cameras and sensors, which is why, for example, down here, instead of active aero, you get this flat panel which makes way for millimeter wave radar. All of this helps to contribute to the fact that this car is perhaps one of the most predictable and reliable vehicles on the road when using this car's advanced driver assist features, which we will talk about a little bit later. Now, moving down the side, the Xpeng G6 retains that amorphous blob design, which is pretty good in terms of aerodynamics, which is why this car has such excellent range. In terms of overall sizing, the G6 is largely similar to what you get from a BYD Sea Lion 7, although this car is a little bit larger than what you get from a Proton EMAS 7. And as a result, that does mean that this car is very generously proportioned, which pays a huge amount of dividends inside, but we'll get on that a little bit later. Now, in terms of rolling stock, this car rides on 20-inch alloy wheels wrapped in Michelin Pilot Sport EV tires. The design of the wheels and the tires are exactly the same regardless of which variant you go for, except for the entry-level standard model, which we haven't yet been able to review because apparently they haven't registered one for the marketing department. Now, the thing about the Xpeng G6 is that with this facelift, they've also changed a few little details in order to make this car look and feel a little bit fresher. So firstly, the body cladding around the wheel arches are now done up in body color, where there used to be a contrasting black, which helped to emphasize this car's sort of crossoveriness. Now it's all just done up in body color, again to make this car look and feel a little bit more premium. The design of the wheels were also updated as part of this facelift, which now have this sort of 5 multi-spoke design, which I do think make this car look a little bit more interesting. And of course, you do get this color. Now, this color has been the source of many an argument because I think it looks pink. Some people say it looks lilac. I couldn't care less because as far as I'm concerned, I do think the car does look good in this color, makes it look a little bit more interesting. But unfortunately, they've removed Malaysian Motoring Orange from the color palette. That wasn't the official color, but that's what we called it. Now, moving further down the side, of course, you do get flush flat door handles in order to improve aerodynamics, so they do pop out when you approach the vehicle. And of course, just like the G6 before it, or the pre-facelift model, you still get frameless windows all the way around. Now, despite the fact there is no frame around these windows, they still do an excellent job in terms of keeping wind and road noise out, which I think is quite commendable. Now, back here is where you find this car's charging port, which is powered, which means that you can open this either from the screen by pressing on the flap itself or by using the app. Now, the app is another point that we'll have to talk about a little bit later before we get onto the road, because there are many, many features to explore. Now, unlike the front, the rear does not get a single light bar all the way across because it is bisected by this camera here, which does serve a very important function, which I'll touch on a little bit later, but just remember there's a camera here. These taillights, however, are a little bit strange because, as you can see illuminated here, you'd think that these are also the brake lights, but they are not. Instead, the scrolling indicators live here, the brake lights live down here, which I think is one of the strangest design choices I've ever seen, particularly given the fact that there is still so much space left available on this light cluster, so they could have integrated the brake lights up here. Putting the brake lights down here, to me, I believe presents something of a safety hazard, because when you are on the road, especially imagine if you're a motorcyclist, for example, your eyes would naturally be drawn to this light cluster up here, particularly given the fact that the indicator lives here. You may not be able to see these low-mounted brake lights, particularly given the fact that Malaysians love to tailgate, especially in traffic. So I think that this is a massive mistake, but I certainly hope that Xpeng will be able to do something about that at some point in the future. Now, beyond that, this rear half of the car does look relatively clean because the wiper lives up here hidden in the rear spoiler. On top of that, there is also the secondary ducktail spoiler here in order to make the car look a little bit more interesting. This is part of the facelift, but otherwise the back end of the Xpeng G6 Performance remains exactly the same as the G6 Long Range and just like the pre-facelift G6 before it. Now, behind this powered tailgate, you will find a pretty good amount of space. This car, as I mentioned earlier, is relatively large, which means that that also pays dividend back here in terms of cargo space. There is more than enough room back here for 5 people's worth of luggage without any issue whatsoever. Although I will note the fact that the clearance from the boot floor to this tonneau cover is relatively shallow, which means that if you have a cabin-sized suitcase, for example, you might have to put it on its face rather than on its side because that might not be enough space there. That said, however, there is still at least space underneath this boot floor to hide more items. This isn't the deepest space in the world, but it is most certainly large enough to hide charging cables or other smaller items that you might want to keep out of view. Now, in addition to this, you can also fold the rear seats 60-40 for added practicality, and they do fold completely flat, which means if you do want to carry larger items, if you're moving house, or if you suddenly need to maximize the space in your SUV, the G6 will be able to accommodate without any issue whatsoever. The only thing that I would like to point out is the fact that while you do have a light and some hooks and that sort of thing in here, as well as a power socket, unfortunately, to fold the rear seats, you do have to reach in. There is no latch here. Now, that isn't too difficult even for me, which means it may or may not be a point of contention, but I'll just point it out. Now, the interior of the G6 has actually seen much more significant revision. And that's because there were quite a few criticisms about the way this cabin was laid out. So, for example, this car used to have motorized air conditioning vents, which meant that you had to control the direction of them through the screen. Now, they are all nicely manual. On top of that, we also complained about the fact that this car did not come with ambient lighting. Now it does. And on top of that, it just makes this interior feel a lot more luxurious, a little bit more upmarket, because some of the materials used have also been updated. So for example, there is now this faux wood trim up here, which feels like open pore wood. And in fact, even when you tap it, it doesn't feel all that plasticky, although I do understand that it is ultimately plastic. In addition to that, the Etcetera soundbar that used to sit at the very top of the dash now lives further ahead, which apparently improves this car's overall acoustic performance. On top of that, all the materials that you can touch and feel all feel lovely and soft touch, from the dash tops, which are stitched here, all the way down past this perforated speaker grille here, all the way further down. It's only when you hit sort of kind of where your shins are, that's where you find some hard, scratchy plastic. The same goes for the center console. You get leather lined with, or rather a leather lined upholstery with stitching up here and more hard plastic down here. Even the center console lid here feels nice and soft, which means that resting your elbow on this feels like a relatively comfortable affair. And so I do think that the revision of this interior is significant enough. Now, what you can probably see from this angle is the fact that there is now a digital rear view mirror. This was also a point that we complained about in the past, because the view out of the rear is relatively compromised as a result of this car's relatively shallow rear windscreen. And so as a result, Xpeng decided to use the camera that already lives on that boot lid to provide a streaming rearview mirror here, which means that you have an excellent unobstructed view all the way out of the car, even if you have 3 passengers in the rear, which I think is fantastic. Now, that aside, in terms of practicality, this car is also still pretty good. You get dual wireless charging pads up here, replete with a little bit of cooling, which does nothing for my phone, which is why I have to direct an air conditioning vent to it. You still don't get a glove box, which I think is very, very strange. Couple of cup holders here, decently sized bin here, replete with rubber lining on the bottom and felt lining around the side, which means that things in here stay relatively quiet. And because this is also the routing for the rear air conditioning, this box actually stays relatively cool. There is also space underneath this floating center console where you will find this car's 12-volt socket as well as USB-C and USB-A ports. And you have decently sized door bins, big enough for a 1.5 liter size bottle without any issue whatsoever. You also have this screen here, which is absolutely massive and incredibly responsive. This runs an Orin something or rather chip. I don't understand this sort of thing, but I'm assured that this is a very, very high performance chip in order to not only power this car's infotainment system, but also to power a lot of the car's thinking functions, which include the ADAS functionality. In addition to this car offering a fantastic 360-degree camera here with a variety of different views for you to choose from, as well as the ability to render this car in 3D in real time, you also have this car's automatic parking assist, which if I trigger here, allows this car to park itself without any intervention from the driver. In addition to this, you can also remote park this car via the app, which I will demonstrate a little bit later. In addition to this, if you're not using Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, which is available wirelessly, you can also split screen this entire display, which means that this allows you to have 2 different displays at any given time. So you can have your parking assistant here as well as your map here, or have something else going all together. And in addition to all of that, you also have a whole bunch of entertainment functions on this screen, which will help to keep you satiated while you wait 18 minutes to charge your car. You have Spotify, YouTube, Disney Plus, and Prime Video all already built into this. And in addition to that, there is also an Xpeng App Store, which allows you to add even more apps to this screen should you want it, including Instagram. Don't know why that's there. Now, beyond this screen, there is also a digital instrument cluster here, which gives you all of the relative functionality that you need. And of course, this is also customizable with no less than 6 options on the left and right, as well as a dedicated display in the middle, which allows you to choose between smart drive mode or map mode. And of course, when you're on smart drive mode, it will display all this car's ADAS functionality. The Xpeng G6 does not offer a heads-up display, no matter how much money you pay for it. And I understand that this is also not available on other models within the lineup. However, if you want a heads-up display, you can get an Xpeng X9. Now, beyond all of this, we have to talk about the technology itself. Now, as I mentioned, there is a screen, it does all of this and that and the other, but the reason why I bring up technology specifically now is because the processing that powers all of this also powers this car's Xopera sound system. Now, Xopera is a proprietary brand owned and operated by Xpeng with its own sound processing system. This is not a Dolby Atmos system or whatever. They've done it all themselves. Now, Xpeng is a relatively new company, which means that on the surface, you might not necessarily be given a lot of confidence by the suggestion that they've done the sound system themselves, but I can attest to you that the sound system in this car is fabulous. It renders sound really beautifully, and I do think that this is the best sound system within this sort of sub 200,000 ringgit electric SUV class. In addition to the bevy of speakers dotted all the way around the car, which also include a set of mid-range speakers hiding behind this perforated leather upholstery up here on the door, you also get a couple of speakers that live in the headrest. Now, this used to be a perforated headrest, so you could see where the speakers are, but now they are no longer perforated, and yet somehow they still maintain fantastic audio quality, just enough to whisper in my ear that there is a speed trap coming ahead on my ways. Now, in the back of the Xpeng G6 Performance, I don't enjoy the same heating, ventilation, and lumbar support as I do in the front, but overall life back here is still pretty good. Now, sat behind myself about 170 centimeters, I have about that much knee room and about that much headroom, which is quite surprising given the fact this car has a relatively sloping roofline, but that's also because the glass roof in this car does not come with an electric sunblind. That said, however, as standard, this panel does come very heavily tinted, which means that in the last week and a half that I've been driving this car around, I haven't felt that much heat ingress from the roof, so that shouldn't be a concern at all. In terms of overall space, everything is quite good. These seats are also very comfortable because they're set quite high up, which means that even sat with my legs pointed straight down, I still have a very good amount of under-thigh support, although I can also stretch my feet in underneath the seat in front of me quite comfortably. These side seats are also relatively scalloped, which means that being sat here, I do feel relatively supported and very, very comfortable, which means that overall, like I said, life back here is pretty good. There is a small storage pocket here, about large enough to hold a phone. There is a door pocket down here, large enough to hold a 1.5 litre size bottle. There are pockets behind the rear seat, and overall, in terms of practicality, that's pretty good. I also have a fold-down center armrest here with a couple of deployable cup holders, replete with more stitching here, which again feels very posh and very upmarket. This car also comes with a couple of USB-C ports back here, which means that you can charge up devices quite easily, as well as a set of relatively high-mounted, centrally mounted air conditioning vents, which means that they are actually quite easy to point towards your face. Now, if you were to have 3 people sat abreast back here, the center seat is a little bit higher and not quite so scalloped, so they're not going to be as comfortable as the passengers to the left and right, but the floor is very flat and there is plenty of space for feet, which means that aside from being perched a little bit higher, life back here is still pretty comfortable. In addition to this, I also have various recline angles to explore with these rear seats, which means that I can sit back here like this and lean back and take in a long journey or have a nap, or I can sit a little bit more upright, a little bit more alert like this, which is still very, very comfortable if you ask me. In terms of material quality, it's just as good as it is in the front, with lots of soft touch materials up here, replete with stitching, and down here as well. More perforations, again, for the mid-range speakers that live sort of up here. And down here, you do find a little bit of hard, scratchy plastic, but then again, this is generally where you find a lot of wear and tear over the years, and so having a more durable material down here might not be so bad. So as far as I'm concerned, this car does seem to be pretty well catered for, and it gets even better for kids because the ISOFIX mounts in this car are very easy to locate, and these doors open quite large or quite wide and offer a very large aperture, which means that even a bulky rear-facing child seat should not be an issue here at all. This is one of the reasons why the Xpeng G6's size to me feels quite ideal, because again, with that long wheelbase and this relatively long and large car, it means that everyone in this car feels like they're in a light, airy space, which can be enhanced further if you choose to have this car with a white colored interior, which I think looks really, really upmarket, but this grey is perhaps a little bit more practical. Now, the G6 is, up until this point, at least through this video, you can tell that this car has had a lot of thought put into it, especially in terms of practical aspects, in terms of comfort aspects and areas that will make this car feel like a more upmarket affair. However, again, the suggestion of the amount of power this car has and the ability to rocket from 0 to 100 in less than 4.2 seconds seems to suggest that the Xpeng G6 Performance is more than just a family car. Or is it? Now, the thing about the Xpeng G6 is this is a very familiar vehicle for us. We've driven this car in pre-facelift form, we've also driven this car in Long Range Pro facelift form, and now we're in the all bells and whistles G6 Performance. There is actually a black edition version of this, which is a little bit more expensive, but that just makes it black, so we're not going to review that because it's the same car. Now, the G6 recipe here is very familiar, which means that you get a comfortable, quiet cabin that is incredibly well built and very refined. It means that this is a car that is comfortable to drive about in town, but perhaps a little bit too soft on the motorway, but still relatively reasonable enough for you to cover meaningful distance in this and still feel relatively confident. That is all the same. The only difference is, with this car, when you put your foot down, it just goes like the clappers. And that's quite a dangerous speed, so let's bring that back down again. Now, I frankly do not understand why anybody needs a car this fast. 0 to 100 in 4 seconds used to be the reserve of supercars. Now you can get this in a family SUV. Why? The only benefit of the G6 Performance, the practical benefit that I can think of this car, is the fact that you have all-wheel drive traction, which means that if you are driving over longer distances, especially if it starts to rain and stuff like that, you might like the fact that you have all-paw traction, the ability to grab onto the road and get you out of situations if you should find yourself in one. But beyond that, I don't think the car needs to be this fast, but I will admit that it is quite addictive to have a car that can go from 0 to 100 in under 4.2 seconds. Now, that aside, like I said, the rest of this car is very predictable, which means that this interior is very nice. It's very comfortable. These seats, for example, offer lumbar support for both the front seats, which is very, very rare to find in almost any segment. And of course, the ventilation is very good, particularly given the fact that our weather has been particularly trying over the last few days, which means it's always nice to be able to sit in the car and have a nice cool bum. So all of this is just very good. The two things I would like to point out about this car in particular is with regards to power efficiency as well as this car's ADAS systems. Now, in terms of power efficiency, you would think that because this car offers fantastical performance and the ability to rocket yourself from a standstill, it must therefore drink or consume power like nobody's business, but actually that isn't the case. Driving this car around, and I've been taking this car everywhere, which means traffic jams, open roads, whatever. When you're on the motorway, the car will consume about 20-ish kilowatt hours to the 100, which means that your realistic range is about 400 to 450 kilometers on a full charge, if you're driving at a steady sort of 110-ish. So with that in mind, I still think 400 kilometers is perfectly fine. That means I could go theoretically from KL to Penang on a single charge, which is what I think a lot of people would like to imagine themselves doing. When you drive about in town, however, it gets much better, with consumption numbers in this car ranging anywhere between 13.5 kilowatt hours to the 100 up to a maximum of about 17 kilowatt hours to the 100, which means that in this car you can very realistically get much closer to that WLTP rated range of 510 kilometers on a full charge. In fact, if driven primarily in town, I wouldn't be surprised if you can well exceed that number. The reason for this efficiency is because this car has that updated SEPA 2.0 platform. Now, as a result of that, it means that this car is now a lot better at recapturing energy via the regenerative braking, which plays a huge part towards making these cars a lot more efficient, and which is why you can achieve a much better range rather from that 80 kilowatt hour battery compared to something like, say, Sea Lion 7 or a BYD Seal. Now, that's all very good. The other thing that's also very good in this car is the ADAS functionality. Now, I bring this up because we've talked about Xpeng ADAS systems before. It is a vision-based system primarily. That's why this car has cameras all over the place. However, when I had this car, during the week and a half it is I've been driving this car around, there was one morning that I woke up to a notification on my phone from the Xpeng app saying that there was an update available to this car. So it said that among the many things that it would update, including some bugs and stuff like that, it also said that there was some improvements to this car in terms of lane change assist as well as adaptive cruise control. Now, one of the things that the Xpeng used to do, which I found incredibly irritating, was if you set the cruise control to say 110, 120 kilometers an hour, the moment you turn the steering wheel any meaningful amount, the car would start to slow down. This is something called comfort cornering assist or something to that effect, and it's very, very common in Chinese cars. However, on Malaysian roads, you don't really need to do that, and if I need to slow down, I'll just shut off the cruise control and do it myself, rather than let the car do it, because when it brakes, it does brake quite aggressively, which means that if you happen to have a car behind you, they might not necessarily expect you to be slowing down so suddenly, particularly if you have nothing ahead of you. So after I updated the software in this car, a few things changed. Firstly, my blind spot view camera thing moved from my instrument cluster to the center display, the way it used to in the pre-facelift car, which I think is not a good thing because I would much have preferred it in my line of sight. I have no idea why it's done that. I'll have to speak to somebody from Xpeng Malaysia to understand that a little bit better. But the other thing that it did was it stopped braking in corners with the adaptive cruise control on, which meant that when I had to cover a distance from KL to Kuala Pilah and back, it meant that I could just turn on the adaptive cruise control and just rely on the car to manage the speed and manage the distance, and it was a much more comfortable affair compared to how it used to be prior to that software update. So, as far as I can tell, it seems that the Xpeng G6 is getting better over time. So buying now doesn't necessarily mean that you might miss out on some updates or some changes later on in its life. If it's a software-driven thing, they could very easily update it into a car that you already own, which means that, again, this car should always feel bang up to date. Now, when you put that together with this refined, improved interior, the improved sound system, the fantastic technology available, and the various functionalities that you get within the app, that, to me, just cements the fact that the Xpeng G6 is, by far and away, the best electric SUV in this segment. For under 200,000 ringgit, this car offers so much that other vehicles simply cannot. This interior, for example, is more refined than anything else. This interior feels more comfortable than anything else. You get more technology than anything else in the market, barring a Tesla Model Y. And it just makes this car such an easy, likable package, which also makes it very easy for us to recommend to anyone who might be looking to buy within this segment. That said, however, if you are looking to buy a car within this space that is perhaps maybe a little bit more oriented towards fun, then might I suggest taking a look at the iCar V23. Now, make no mistake, that car is not nearly as comfortable or as spacious or as refined as the Xpeng G6, but that car has bucket loads of character, which makes it very likable. And so if you're looking for a car to just drive about in town, that car's just great. And of course, if you are looking for something that is perhaps a little bit more predictable, then there is the BYD Sea Lion 7, which guarantees that you will blend into the corporate car park and the suburban sprawl very easily, because it feels like literally everyone has one of those, and it just feels like a very unimaginative choice. But if you want what is, once again, undoubtedly the best car within the segment, which is now more competitively priced and even more compelling a package than ever before, the Xpeng G6 is definitely the car to watch. This car is brilliant in almost all scenarios, barring the oddly placed brake lights, and I just cannot recommend this car highly enough. It's just really likable. And in fact, if I had the money and I was looking to buy within the segment, I'd probably end up with one of these. But maybe I'd ask them very nicely to paint it in orange. And so that concludes our review of the 2026 Xpeng G6 Performance all-wheel drive. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, hit the little bell icon to notify every time we make a new upload. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, as well as our new WhatsApp channel. Thank you so much for watching. We'll catch you in the next one. Take care, stay safe, and jangan bodoh.